It was supposed to be a homecoming. Wartime blackout lifted, factory hooters back to signaling lunch, and football returning like a familiar song. On Saturday, 9th March 1946, Bolton Wanderers hosted Stoke City in the FA Cup at Burnden Park. People arrived in waves, men with D-mob haircuts, women in mended coats, boys clutching cigarette cards of their heroes. They wanted something simple, 90 minutes with a ball skidding over chalk, cheering that had nothing to do with sirens. The turnstiles began clicking and never seemed to stop. The ground was patched by the war. Metal railings had been cut away for salvage. Crush barriers on the open terracing were fewer and weaker. Regulations were loose after empty seasons. Stoke traveled with a magnate named Stanley Matthews, and the paper said get there early. People did. Then more came. Trains arrived late and full. The pavements outside the railway end became a river of bodies with no banks. Police tried to count heads and found only shoulders. Burnden held its breath the way old grounds do, tight turnstiles at corners, high walls, stairways narrowed by repairs. On the east embankment, the crowd compacted until a turn of a shoulder here made a shoulder turn there, pressure moving by physics, not choice. When the gates were closed, thousands were still outside. A service gate opened to ease the crush. A flood entered, others climbed, others were lifted. Inside, the terraces swallowed them. Capacity meant little because no one could see it anymore. Kickoff came like a promise. The crowd swayed to see the first cross, and an iron barrier near the front bent, groaned, and snapped like a tired hinge. People fell forward in layers, feet trapped, ribs pinned. Those behind, pushed by the fact of their own numbers, pressed without malice. Hands reached up and found wool and hair and coat buttons. The first scream was a thin sound inside a roar. On the pitch, players saw movement where there should have been rail. A policeman blew a whistle and then shouted for others to pull bodies up and over. Some came up gasping, some did not. The referee halted play. Policemen, players, and spectators carried the stricken onto the cinder track, then the turf. Greatcoats were spread as blankets. Boards were fetched from advertising hoardings for stretchers. Doctors and St. John ambulance men knelt and counted. Breath or no breath, pulse or no pulse. A gap along the touchline became a ward. People who had been singing now stood very still. The smell of the day changed. Beer and tobacco replaced by wet wool and fear. More came off the terrace. The injured, the faint, and quickly, the dead. In a terraced crush, there is a terrible moment when those standing become the scaffolding for those who cannot. Orderlies lifted children first. Men who had stormed beaches now kissed strangers' foreheads and whispered they were safe because the whisper felt like something to do. A girl looked for her father and found only his hat. A boy looked for his mate and found an officer closing eyes. He could not bring himself to touch. Someone went to the referee with a question no one should have to ask. Stop or carry on? Outside, the streets still pressed. Outside the country, people wanted football to be stronger than grief. After a long, stunned interval, the ball rolled again. On one touchline, bodies lay beneath coats, face up to a sky that had forgotten how to be kind. Players and officials moved down that side with a hush that made studs sound like hammers. The match finished because matches, then, were expected to finish. By nightfall, the words were fixed. Tragedy, stampede, barrier collapse, and the number that would not change. 33 dead. Hundreds more injured. The lists filled columns, names, ages, streets. 2 were children. Husbands were identified by a neighbor who ran down the road in house shoes. Mothers came to the gates and asked to see. Policemen learned to shake their heads with gentleness. In kitchens, the radio told the facts twice an hour, and then someone turned it off because the facts did not care whether a room was ready to hear them. Inquests began as flowers were laid. Witnesses described the ground that day, removed barriers, the opened gate, the impossible math of bodies in a tapering wedge. The coroner heard how wartime salvage had left sections unbraced, how ticketless entry turned, counting into guessing, and how the police, faced with a crush outside, chose the least bad option and created another crush inside. Evidence marked where feet lost purchase and where breath ran out. No villain was named. Responsibility appeared shared and indivisible. The government appointed Mr. Molwyn Hughes to investigate. His report refused euphemism. It described the slope, the density, the broken rails, the way a body becomes load-bearing when iron fails. It set out what should have been in place and what must be in place thereafter. Capacities calculated by area, proper turnstile counts, stronger barriers at prescribed intervals, more exit gates kept unlocked, better stewarding, and authority to close an entrance before danger begins. Local authorities, not club chairmen alone, would certify a ground's safety. Dry words, but firm rules. Burnden lived on, but it did not forget. A memorial took its place, and each year a small crowd gathered to read names and to bring back the day's teaching. A football ground is a built thing that needs care as precise as a bridge. The game moved forward on those instructions. Decades later, when other disasters forced Britain to relearn crowd safety, investigators reached for Molwyn Hughes's sentences and built newer guides on that foundation. Every modern safety certificate contains the ghost of that report and the breath of those who were not counted in time. What did survivors remember most? Pressure, more than pain. The weight coming from behind and above. A coat button pressed into a cheek like a rivet. The sudden sightline to the pitch because the person ahead was no longer upright. Years later, some could not stand at a bus stop without counting exits. Some always took the edge of a crowd. Some never went back to the ground. There is an image that will not leave the story. Play resumed with a line of covered bodies along the touchline. It does not make sense to a modern supporter. It barely made sense then. It belongs to a year when people had only just finished learning how to keep living while the worst things happened in view. Football, asked to be medicine, tried. Football, asked to be mourning, faltered. Safety, asked to be invisible until it failed, learned to stand in the light. The roads around the stadium have changed. The terraces are gone. The town bears the years in brick and thrift. Yet the lesson that left Burnden travels with every turnstile click. Count them in, count them out, count them safe. When an exit gate stays open on a busy night, when a steward taps a barrier and frowns, when a match is delayed because a section looks too tight, that is the aftermath still doing its work, invisible and exacting. This story is more than a number and a date. It is a set of hands, police, doctors, players, strangers, lifting, carrying, checking pulse against a watch, making the old field a triage floor under lantern light. It is a report with dry pages that saved lives. It is a town that expected to cheer and instead learned how quickly a crowd can become a force of nature. It is 33 people who did not come home and a stadium that rewrote its rules because of them. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.